Hello everyone and welcome. In today's demo, we are going to generate an Ssh key pair and we are going to use the same to log into our on-premises instances as well as instances on GCP, AWS, Azure and Oracle VM. Now to simulate on-premises, I'm going to use VirtualBox on this laptop, but that should give you a general idea of how Ssh key pairs work and how you can use the same key pair to actually log into all of your multi-cloud setup as well as your data center virtual machines or instances. Now, should you do it? Well, it is a matter of convenience, and generally convenience comes at the cost of security. So you should not do it unless you have a quite robust setup, like for example, if you see in this particular diagram, between the corporate network and each of this cloud, you have a site-to-site VPN, right? And unless you have that kind of a setup, as well as SSH key forwarding, which we are going to see in a later video, unless you have that, you shouldn't do it. But this video is so that you understand how SSH key pairs work and how you can use your own SSH key pairs on any of the most popular clouds out there. All right, so now before we get going, let's look at the agenda for today. So first we are going to go over the required demo setup. There's not a lot, but yeah, we'll go over that. Then we are going to create an SSH key pair on this particular laptop that I'm recording on. Now I'm using Windows 10, but in the blog that is linked in the description of this video, there will be instructions if you are using Mac or Linux. They should be fairly similar, but yeah, they are there. Now, then we are going to actually add the public key of the key pair that we have created onto an on-premises instance and then into GCP, AWS and Azure consoles. Then we are going to create instances on GCP, AWS, Azure and OCI, and we are going to mention or we are going to use the public key that we had earlier uploaded. And then we are going to use the same key or same private key to log into each of those instances, right? And then we are going to also, for those who use actually putty on Windows, right, we are going to extract or convert the private key to putty PPK format because you know, a lot of folks have problems with that. And then we are going to again log in from putty to all these instances. So that's basically the agenda for today. And now let's get going. Okay, so let's quickly look at the setup that I have. So I have putty and I also have putty gen that we are going to require later. So I've downloaded it from this particular link. I'll again put the link in the description of this video as well as in the blog, which is also linked in the description. I have also downloaded git bash. So you have to search for git bash on Google. Go ahead to download. And you can go ahead and you know, download for the operating system that you're using. Now again, if you're using Mac and Linux, you don't really need that, but for Windows to run Linux commands, I'm going to use git bash. So that's really that. So once you download, go ahead and install it. And once you do install it, you are going to get an option like this. So for example, so notice here I've downloaded the putty gen. So if I right click, I'm going to get an option of git bash. So I can just go ahead and open git bash here. And also I have logged into all of the cloud providers that I'm going to use for today's demo. So I have downloaded, or I have logged into GCP, Oracle, then AWS as well as you know, Azure. All right, so that's basically the setup. Now the next step of our agenda is to create an SSH key pair. So let's go ahead and do that. So for that, in my git bash, I'm going to go ahead and say ssh key gen, and I'm going to say -c, and I'm going to call it multi-cloud. So this is basically to generate an SSH key pair. -c is for comment. Now this is particularly required for Google Cloud because the way it creates the user on the instance is using this particular comment, and we'll see that once we actually use it. But yeah, SSH keygen, enter, and now it's going to ask us where this file needs to be created. So I'm going to say /multi-cloud and underscore maybe key, something like that, enter. And I'm not going to keep any passphrase or password to this key, so enter again. So now if I did ls-ltr, notice that we have two files that recently got created. This is basically the multi-cloud key, this is the private key, and then there is a public key component as well. Actually, this private key also has both private and public key components, but the public key component is also given separately as well. So now what we can do is take a look at these keys, and for that I'm going to go ahead and let me maximize this, and let me say vim, or I can just cat, or since you're on Windows you can look at it in any of the editors of your choice, maybe Notepad++, right? So notice that it basically cats both of these files. So in fact I should have yeah, I can actually scroll up. So notice first the private key, right, and then end the private key, and then public key is printed here as well. Now currently we are interested in the public key, right, which we need to add to each of our cloud providers. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this public key, right, or in fact let me just clear the console and cat multi-cloud key.pub and copy till here, and let's go ahead and add it to one of the projects in my GCP console. So public keys are in Compute Engine and metadata. So you can go to Compute Engine, scroll down, go to metadata, and here you see metadata and SSH keys. Select SSH keys, say edit, say add item, and go ahead and paste the public key here, and go ahead and save. So once you do, it says yeah. So notice that for your EC or for your virtual machine instances, GCP is actually going to use this as your username, which comes from the comment, right? So that's how by default it works. It doesn't work the same way for the rest of the cloud providers, and you'll find that out. But yeah, so we have added the public key here. Now let's go ahead and add the same key to AWS as well as to Azure. For Oracle, we are going to add it while we create the instance, right? So let's go ahead to AWS first, and I'm using the new console, so I'm going to go ahead to EC2 and scroll down to key pairs, and I'm going to say import a key pair, and I'm going to call this multi-cloud underscore key, and go ahead and paste the content, and maybe add a tag, purpose multi-cloud, and import. So notice that our multi-cloud key has gotten imported here, right? So that's good. Now let's go ahead and do the same on Azure console. All right, so now we are in Azure console. You can go and search for SSH keys and you'll land here. In fact, let me try that. SSH keys. Yeah, so you should land here. I have a couple of keys already here, but I'm going to create another one. I'm going to go ahead and say create. And I have a free trial subscription. That's not a problem. I'm going to select a particular resource group. I'm going to do this in the US Central group or Central Resource Group. And let's go ahead and give the key pair a name. So I'm going to say multi-cloud key, right? And I'm going to say upload existing public key and paste the content that we already had for a public key. Go ahead, review and create. And create. So while that's happening, let's go ahead and actually start creating instances. So this will take some time, but this should happen. Now let's start creating our virtual machines, right? Or VM instances. All right, so let's start with Google Cloud, and we're going to create a virtual machine. So we are already in the compute engine. and we're going to go to VM instances and create an instance. I'm going to pretty much leave everything as default, except that I'm going to go ahead and change the size of this instance to a smaller size because we're just going to use it as a demo. And yeah, so everything seems all right here. And I'm going to say allow for default access. Now if I go into this particular field, notice that it mentions networking disk security. So notice for security it says SSH keys, shielded VM and SSH keys. Now here notice that since we added the SSH key at the project level, they should work unless you block the project wide SSH key from here. Now one more thing I want to check is to see what kind of image I've picked up. So I picked up a Debian GN. I think I'm gonna leave it as is. That's not a problem. Yeah, so let's go ahead and create the GCP virtual machine. All right, so create. So now while that is happening, let's go ahead and create an Ec2 instance as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say launch instances. And again, gonna leave everything pretty much default here. T2 micro is fine, maybe pick up a smaller one. If you're within the free tier, go ahead and choose the T2 micro. I'm going to go ahead and use the T2 nano here. Go ahead and keep everything the same on this page as well. Add storage, it's fine. Add tag, it's always a good practice to add tags. So I'm going to say multi-cloud and security group. I don't have a security, I do have a lot of security groups here. So I'm going to pick up a security group, which is, so make sure you have a security group which allows port 22 traffic from everywhere, or create a new one. Review and launch. Now here is where it's going to ask me for a key pair. So I'm going to choose an existing key pair, and I'm going to pick up our multi-cloud underscore key that we had earlier created and uploaded. I'm going to say yes, I acknowledge I have access to this P key, the private key part of this key, and launch instances. So we have currently launched two instances on two different cloud providers, on GCP as well as on AWS. Now let's go to Azure and create a VM here as well. So I'm going to say virtual machines, click. I am going to say OK. In fact, we should have checked our SSH key that we had created earlier, whether it is available or not. So notice that this multi-cloud key is here. So yeah, let's go back to virtual machines and let's create one. I'm going to say virtual machine, and yeah, so I'm going to choose the US Central Resource Group that I had created earlier. I'm going to call this multi-cloud demo VM. Everything is okay except maybe the size of this instance. Yeah, it's also fine. So I've chosen the B1S instance, a smaller one. Now notice it says authentication type, SSH public key. Now let's go ahead and actually scroll down here and say please use existing key stored that is used in stored in Azure, and we're going to choose our multi-cloud key which we had uploaded earlier. Now notice that here the username is Azure user. We are going to keep it as is, don't worry about that. And yeah, we're going to allow for port 22. That's fine. Go ahead and review and create. I think that should be fine. So it's going to review, and once after that we get to create the virtual machine. So I'm going to go ahead and create the virtual machine. Alright, so we have launched virtual machines in 3 different cloud providers now, GCP, AWS and Azure. Now let's go ahead and do the same with Oracle Cloud. Alright, so I have logged into the Oracle Cloud as well. I'm going to go to compute and instances. gonna go ahead and create an instance. Again, leave everything as pretty much default, except that maybe let me choose a different image, and let's choose the Ubuntu one. Select image, and everything seems okay, except that so now if I scroll down here, notice that it says add SSH keys. I'm going to say upload public key files, which is this, or paste public keys, even better. So let's go ahead and paste our public key. So I don't think we have copied anything else since then, so let's go ahead and do that. So we have pasted our public key here, right? And everything seems all right. And there is an option to change the firewall, but I think I can do that after the instance is created. So while these instances are provisioned or come up, we are going to, in fact, one of these instances just came online. So what we are going to do is we are going to first go ahead and log into our on-premises instance, which is a Debian machine running in VirtualBox to simulate on-premises. And we're going to place the public key. Now the idea is, so whatever we are going to do for this particular instance is what all the cloud providers are going to do automatically for you. But so that you understand how the SSH key pairs work and where to actually place the public key, right? We are going to use this particular instance, right? And then again, eventually we are going to use the same private key to log into all the instances, including the on-premises instance as well as the 4 cloud instances. All right, so let's get going. So first I'm going to go ahead and log into this instance using username and password way. So load this session, go ahead, and I'm going to say login as Nikhil, and the password. Now once in here, what I'm going to do is so the public key part of the key, you have to place it in a particular file. So ls-ltr.ssh/authorized keys is the file where I need to place the public key. So that's what we are going to do next. And we have our public key as well as entire key pair here. But we can do the same as before. We are just going to cat it, copy it from here. Let's go ahead onto our Debian instance, vim.ssh, and you can use the editor that you like. And I'm going to go to the last line and go ahead and notice there's already an SSH key pair here, but we're going to, or public key pasted here. I'm going to paste another one. So this is the one that we had, and go ahead and save and come out, right? So now notice that I have pasted the authorized or public key into the authorized keys file. Now the next part of the demo is to log into all these instances, include this on-premises instance, using the private key that we have. So notice here we have the key pair and we have the public key. And now let's go ahead and first log into the Debian instance, which is kind of on-premises instance, and then we'll log into GCP, AWS, Azure, and Oracle Cloud instance as well. So let's do that. So for that, I'm going to use a command called ssh -i. This is for identity, and I'm going to say use this particular key to log in, right? So in SSH logins, your clients have the private key, and the public key is there on the servers, as we have seen with the Debian example, and we are also going to see the same on the cloud instance as well. But anyway, so now let's go ahead and say the user that needs to log in and the IP address. So it's 192.168.99.102 and enter. So notice that now my prompt has changed, and I have actually logged in without providing the username and the password. This was possible because we had uploaded the public key part of this particular key, and that's it. We are now logged in to our on-premises instance. So that's pretty nice, right? So I'm going to say who am I, and that's that. So I'm going to exit from here. Now let's one by one start logging into the cloud instances as well. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so let's begin with our VM instance on Google Cloud. So copy that, and let's copy the external IP, and again come back here. Later we are going to use putty to log in, but for now let's go ahead and do this. So again here same thing, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the username to multi-cloud at this, enter, and I'm going to go ahead and say yes. So notice that now I've logged in, and I'm going to say who am I. So remember I told you about Google Cloud using the comment in the SSH key as the user that it creates for you on the particular instance, and that's it. So we have logged in to the Google Cloud instance, right, as well, and the name of that instance is instance 1. Now let's check what is there in the authorized keys for this particular instance, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say cat.ssh again in the home directory of the current user, and authorized keys, and cat that one. So notice that this is the same key that we had uploaded onto the project, and that's what here. So same process is used of putting a public key into the newly created instances SSH authorized keys file under the same user's home directory, right? So if I did pwd now, so notice that and if I did ls-ltra, notice that within this home directory there is this ssh.ssh folder, and within that the authorized keys file has the public key, and we are able to connect to this instance using the private key that we had. So next up, let's exit from here, and let's go ahead and log into our AWS instance. So that should be ready. Click here, get the public IP. Now on AWS, the instance basically has the user as ec2-user by default. So ec2-user at the instance. Again, we are not changing the key. Notice we have the same key that and again all these commands you are going to find in the blog that is linked in the description of this video. So enter, and I'm going to say yes again, and there we go. Now who am I, and in fact let's go ahead and cat the same file, and there you go, right? So that's really it. Here as well, right, we have now AWS has tweaked the comment, and they have put in, instead of multi-cloud, they have put in multi-cloud_key, which was the name of our key, but that's fine. We are able to log into AWS, we are able to log into, or we are able to log into on-premises, GCP, and AWS. So let's next up Azure, right? So I'm going to exit from here, and let's go ahead to our Azure console, and let's go to resources, and where is the public IP? So just copy that, and again use the same command. Azure user is our user, and paste that here. I'm going to say yes, and there we go. We have logged into our Azure instance as before. Let's get the .ssh and authorized keys file. There we go, and pwd. Yes, so we are able to log into Azure as well. Now for Oracle Cloud, I think I have to update something here. So let's go ahead and update the security groups, I think, and I'm gonna choose a security group that allows me SSH. otherwise this wouldn't work just because there's no access. Now again, in this instance, I'm going to copy the public IP, and since we chose the Ubuntu image on Oracle Cloud, I'll have to use the username as Ubuntu. So let's go ahead and do that. Ubuntu at, notice everything else is the same, and there we go. Yes, and now we are logged in, and again we're gonna go ahead and cat the .ssh authorized keys. There we go, pwd, and exit. All right, so that completes the first part of our demo. We have created the SSH key pair, and we have deployed the public key part of the key pair onto our on-premise instance as well as various cloud instances. And then using the same private key, we were able to log into all of those. Again, while this is extremely convenient to do in your multi-cloud setup, don't do this unless you have the rest of the security in place. All right, with that, now for those who actually use Windows and PuTTY to connect to your Linux instances, may it be on premises or as well as on your cloud, right, or cloud providers, let's go ahead and find out how to use PuTTY to connect to all these instances, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So for that, notice that I am in the directory where we had created our multi-cloud key, as well as the public key got created in the process. And we also have the PuTTY gen that we have downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and open it, and then I'm going to go ahead and load this particular public key, or this particular key pair rather, and save the private key, right? So I'm going to press load. In fact, let me copy this, load, and open, and say all files, and pick up the key, and it says successfully. Now notice, make sure that you use the latest PuTTY keygen or PuTTY key generator. Another thing that you should do is click here, and parameters for saving the key file, choose the PPK version to be 2. Okay, and save the private key, and I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to save it in the same folder, and I'm going to call it multi-cloud underscore key dot ppk, right? So let's go ahead and save that and close it. So notice this is the key that I can use with PuTTY. So let's go ahead and use that key on first our on-premises instance, and then on all other instances as well. So I'm gonna start a new PuTTY session. In fact, let me go ahead and exit from here, and just for convenience, I'm going to use the same profile. So I'm going to load this same profile, and what I'm going to do now is, in fact, let me copy this. Let's go ahead, and while in PuTTY, I'm going to go into data, and I'm going to say auto login username as Nikhil, and I'm going to go into SSH, then I'm going to go to auth, and I'm going to paste here the multi-cloud key path, or select it, and again go back to this session, go ahead and save this session, right, and open. So notice that now earlier we had connected using ssh-i command, right, in git bash, but now I'm going to I have used directly the PuTTY to connect. Now for that I had to convert the private key into the PPK format, and that's what I've done. Now we can do the same thing for all the cloud providers, right? So we're gonna let's do that, okay, or the instances on the cloud as well. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and create a new session, and now instead of creating the whole thing again, I'm just going to use the same profile, and I'm just going to change the IP addresses here, and whenever required, I'm going to change the auto login username, right? So let's start with our Google Cloud instance. Let me copy the public IP address again. So notice that here this works from PuTTY because we have converted using PuTTY gen, and we have saved the private key in a PPK format. So that's that. Another thing I need to change with Google Cloud is I'm gonna say into data and say the auto login username is multi-cloud. Go back to session, maybe call this GCP instance, something like that. Save it and open and say yes. So notice that now I'm on the GCP instance, right? So again, using the PPK, we have logged in onto the instance, right, in GCP. Now same, let's go ahead and do that with AWS Ec2 instance. Copy the public address. Let's create a new session. I'm going to pick up the GCP. Okay, let's pick up the GCP instance, load that one. I'm going to change the IP address. Let's call it the AWS instance, and in the data I'm going to say ec2-user, and notice the key remains the same. I'm not going to change the key. Go ahead into session again, save it, open, yes. So notice that now using putty you are able to log in also to the EC2 instance. Let's keep going with Azure. Copy the public address, and next we are going to do Oracle, but yeah, so let's go ahead and create again another new session. Select the AWS instance, load that one, change the IP address. Now one thing we need to change is the user, so Azure user. Everything else remains the same. Let me call this Azure instance, save it and open, and yes. So notice that now we have logged into the Azure instance. Again, who am I? Azure user. All right. Now, next to Google or Oracle Cloud as well. So again, here, new session. Now we're gonna pick up the Azure, right? Azure instance node. Paste it here, and this is actually the Oracle Cloud instance, or OCI instance. I'm gonna call, I'm gonna change the username here. So data, it's our Azure user, it is Ubuntu, and it's really that. Session, save, and open. Yes. Now notice that we are logged in onto, so who am I, right? And we have logged in onto the Oracle Cloud instance virtual machine as well. All right, so let's summarize what we did in this particular demo. So we actually created an SSH key pair, which ended up creating two files for us, which are here, multi-cloud key and multi-cloud key pub, these two files, right? Then we actually went ahead and deployed this public key onto our on-premise instance, as well as GCP, AWS, and Azure, right? Then we created instances on the cloud, and we also went ahead and used Git Bash to actually log into all of these instances, including the instance on premises. We also looked at how the SSH public key was found in .ssh/authorized keys file for all of these, including the on-premises instance. And then we learned how to use putty to connect to all these, but putty does not accept these files, right? So it has to be converted into its own format. For that we use putty gen, We did some tinkering with the way the key file is saved, choosing the version 2 in the process, and we saved this ppk file, we added that to our putty, and then went ahead and um, connected using putty to all of the on-premises as well as the cloud instances. So that is how you can use your own SSH key pair to connect to your on-premises as well as to all your cloud instances as well. All right, so that basically completes the demo for today. Make sure again, as I've already said earlier, use caution while doing this. While this is extremely convenient, make sure that you have the rest of the security in place. All right, so that completes the demo for today. Thank you very much for joining, and do check out the blog that is linked in the description of this video. And happy cloud computing, everyone. Bye.